Okie doke. So before John is going to tell us about building and testing database extensions, we have a small, nice announcement that is to be made.
Hi, Vladimir and I, we're glad to announce that we've found the next release manager for. Which one's the next one? I thought it was real. Okay. Yeah, I just didn't want to say something wrong. And 1903, it's Linus Heckman.
Thank you. When Sam and Vladimir were talking about the release yesterday and saying that they were looking for a new release manager, I wasn't actually thinking I could do this, but then one of my colleagues was sort of looking back at me and me, and then I thought about it and. Oh, okay. And then I thought about it. Hi, Internet. Yeah, then I thought about it, and yeah, it seems like an interesting thing to do, so I volunteered, and apparently I'm the only one, so. And it would be quite nice if anyone's interested in, already interested in being a release manager for the following release, 1909. If they want to start thinking about that now, and feel free to get in touch. I'm Svalerite on IRC, and I've got some business cards over on the table over there. And yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Alrighty, cool. So with that cleared up, we are ready for John, who's gonna, like I said, be talking to us about building and testing database extensions with Nix. Here's your mic. There you go. Give him a round of applause, please.
Hello. Thanks for having me. This is kind of a presentation about how I've been using Nix at work. It's not really recommendations, I guess, more of a description of what I've done, maybe things that I think could improve, or from my side, or from maybe things I could contribute to Nixpkgs, and just sort of a perspective from that angle. I've been using Nix for probably about a year and a half. I initially started it for this project, which is something I'll describe in the talk. And I've switched to using it as NixOS is my main operating system of choice for work and home. Generally pretty proud of it, or pleased with it. So let's just begin the talk. So I'm just going to describe. I have a couple of Postgres extensions and a Redis extension that I build and maintain as part of my job. And I'm just going to cover how that's done. And as I said, it's more of a description than a prescription. Maybe there are some good ideas, I don't know. So background on database extensions, particularly in the context of Postgres. They've been around since about 9.1, or exactly since 9.1. And they're actually pretty flexible in what you can do. Postgres has always had the ability for custom types, and that was its original selling point, but extensions can load in complicated functionalities that you might want to have in your database. Some examples, Citus or PostGIS, TimescaleDB. Citus is sort of a distributed database product. They're a private company that does a SaaS product based on it, but kind of a bit wild when it comes to changing what Postgres actually does. PostGIS is for geographical data. If you want to have a whole bunch of locations and find out a query on which locations are in a certain area, you can do really cool stuff with that. TimescaleDB turns Postgres into a time series database, which are, and as, I mean, these are pretty radical departures from what you would usually do, but still within the Postgres framework and with the Postgres protocol, and you use SQL, so quite handy for a development perspective. There is a caveat though, if you're going to write an extension. They only work with the major release that you compile against them. This is quite handy for making sure everything is compatible when you deploy it, but say you want to update your database, you need to make sure that your extension is the correct version, otherwise they won't load. So we were developing MySQL UDF, which works on a very similar kind of system. And basically, one of my co-workers didn't really understand how I'd laid out the project. We were deploying into a Docker file, and the Docker file had the major release of a particular MySQL version. He updated the build dependencies, and it just meant that, yeah, if you forget to match the versions, it's just not going to work, and it's going to be difficult to figure out exactly why it doesn't work until you actually try and use the image. So he'd heard about Nix, so he was like, well, why don't we try that? And we did. So here's kind of how my workflow would work before I started using Nix. Have to install the dev package with Ubuntu package manager or apt or something. Install my other dependencies. Build the project locally. Build a Docker image with that output matching the right server version, and then start it as a local container, and then run all my tests against the service. It's nice. It's a lot of steps to remember how to do. If you want to maybe write a bash script that does all this, it's nice. Problem is, if I want to intervene in something or do something differently, it's a bit more complicated. If I want to run benchmarks instead of the regular tests, if I want to run a specific test, or yeah, if I want to just connect to the database itself, I could just write a complicated bash script, but I'm really lazy. So can I just push it to my CI pipeline that I've got because we're hip and trendy? Yeah, okay, but now it's got to download the dependencies, wait for the extension to build, wait for the Docker image to build, wait for the Docker image to be uploaded to the registry. It's got to pull the image again, start it as a service, and then I've got to wait for my test to fail to find out that something's gone wrong. This is just motivated by my laziness. So let's say I want to update which major release I'm using for my base database. I've got to update the documentation, got to get a new Docker image, got to update my local packages, and I've got to update the remote build environment. So, okay, digression into how Postgres works. I'm just going to talk briefly about how it stops you from loading modules that aren't compatible. And that's called PG module magic, which I like to think of as a hashtag rather than a macro. So essentially there's a magic struct that it uses. You just add if and def PG module magic, add it to your build, sorry, to your C extension. And basically this just stops you from loading your extension dynamically. So this is what the magic struct looks like if you're interested. So if you were wanting to build something usually for the Postgres extension system, they provide PGXS, which is kind of just a big makefile thing include that you can add. And it will pull some module definitions and basically use that to hide a lot of the complexity from you. This is an example from the documentation for Postgres. Basically, it's definition of the header and C file where you've got your code for your extension, some versioned SQL for telling you how to load and unload the module, and then this tool called pgconfig, which basically tells you how Postgres was set up. And then this is an example of what the SQL might look like. So it's just a make file. Turns out Nixpkgs is very good at handling make files. So it's actually a pretty easy win. If you want to add an extra dependency, you can just use the LD flags. You can customize things with the C flags. Bit of a pain with pgconfig though. I'll show you why. Essentially, pgconfig will have a bunch of C flags from when Postgres is compiled, and LD flags as well, and share them. So when I am building an extension, I'll do this kind of bad practice thing where I'm adding the LD flags here. I have, since writing this, had a better idea about how I could do this, but essentially you just have to add a pre-configure phase, and you can integrate directly with PGXS, because it seems to work pretty well that way. So let's say you wanted a standard make derivation for Postgres extension, and you've got XX hash. Pretty straightforward. Everyone here is familiar with Nix. I don't know why I'm telling you this. And same pre-configure stuff. So let's look at extensions in Nixpkgs. There's actually quite a few already. I was not super familiar with where they were or how to discover them. I knew PostGIS was there, but it's kind of in its own libraries directory, whereas these are in the Postgres directory. So I think maybe discoverability for something like that could be discovered. Could be improved a bit more. But the NixOS Postgres module can just have these added to it, and it works, which is something I would want for my extension as well, but I'm not really sure how you do that, because how does Postgres find my extension? So yeah, how do we use it? Well, I just tried to copy the way NixOS does it. If you look into the ways NixOS loads extensions, basically just has a thing that checks if you've asked for any extra plugins to be enabled, and if you have, just adds them into some paths and symlinks them into the build output. But it needs to do a bit of extra stuff with post-build wrapping to basically just set this Nixpkgs libdir, which yeah, it turns out is quite important. Basically, Postgres will look in a couple of places for where your extensions might be, and it's not in the Nix store, so you need to give it a bit more advice on where that would be. So that's, I think, is why Nixpkgs libdir is set, which comes from a patch that's made to Postgres when it's built. So this is where that comes from. So that wrapper will allow you to provide the libdir to find your extensions. So can we just set it to our the build output from our extensions, and we're good to go, right? Well, not quite, because there are some extensions from Postgres that you might want to use anyway. So that's why you need to take the same approach and wrap it as well. Here I've pretty much copied the same thing. Very similar idea. I'm just calling a package with some extensions in, just some more paths. But I've also exposed in it to be in CreateDB. We'll see why in a moment, because I'm using them to test. But yeah, this just defines my custom Postgres, and I'm using a particular package from Nixpkgs there. I don't know if this is clear. Okay. There'll be plenty of time for questions, hopefully. So, I can build this package. It's all very nice. What do I do with it? I can probably deploy it somewhere and test it, but could I just maybe start it on my system and give it a go? Yeah, okay, but then I need to remember to delete that database. I'm still kind of the same place I was initially. Maybe I can add it to my script, but then I've got to manage a whole bunch of other things to control that. Essentially, what I found is there's some tools that basically provide you with sort of ephemeral databases that it would basically just kick off a database process with an empty database, empty tables and things. And I'll just use there's a few Python packages, for example, that would provide that. So I'm using testing.PostgreSQL and testing common. And essentially they are things I provide in NixShell. So the idea is to get a pretty good developer ergonomics so that they can just pull up NixShell, get all the dependencies for the project, and then also get what I require for running the tests as well, and other tooling as well. So yeah, I didn't really want to go into too much detail about the Python code that I've written, but generally having access to Python here is quite useful. There's a really nice property-based testing library called Hypothesis, which you can use to make sure that your encoding and decoding works in the way you'd expect. But generally it seems to be, I don't know if many people use this approach. I haven't heard a huge amount about it with using temporary databases. There's a tool called pgtemp. Oh, wait. pgtemp, which is like a bash script that will run an instance of Postgres temporarily. And it handles some of the cleaning up a bit better than what I've been doing. There's also a package for Haskell as well, I think, called temp Postgres, tmp-postgres, which will also do a very similar thing. I don't know how common it is to really need that kind of thing unless you're testing an extension. Most of the time, I think probably unit tests would cover this. The issue is I'm kind of testing how my extension works with Postgres, which is perhaps a unique problem space. And yeah, I end up using PyTest fixtures for controlling the state of the database, which is not very clean and can end up leaking databases, which is an interesting problem as well if you forget to, or if your script breaks improperly. But with the shells that I've written, if you want to just jump in and run all the tests, run a copy of Postgres, run all the SQL commands against it that are required to test the extension. It's essentially 2 commands, which I can just put in the README. I don't need to describe how to apt install all the various packages that people usually require. And I think as somewhere where we're not really familiar with functional programming and we don't really, people haven't really gotten bored with the Nix train, I think having something where it's just 2 commands is really helpful for getting people on board with it. So yeah, cool. I've written this expression where I can just define a Postgres installation with the extensions enabled, or extensions installed as well. And what if I want to update it? Previously I had to update Dockerfile, update all these other things. Now I can just change the package from Nixpkgs. There are a few problems with this. PGXS has regression tests, which are make, install, check phase, which require a running Postgres instance to actually test them. They essentially they're just a script of expected SQL output and some commands. I haven't really thought of a good way to do that. It would be really nice if there is a Nixpkgs or make derivation phase for install check, but it's not actually a build input. It's sort of a runtime dependency of running the tests, and it would be nice if I could just have my single expression for my extension and just be able to run the tests that way. on that expression, in a standalone way, rather than at the moment I kind of bundle up all my extensions and test them together with Postgres. I have no idea how to do that. The other thing is I'm always overriding because I want to make sure that the Postgres version I provide to my extensions is the same as the one that I built with. I kind of think maybe I should just be make my extensions unable to build without Postgres and kind of curry the expression. But I haven't seen that pattern very often in Nixpkgs, so I'm kind of wary of it. Briefly, Redis also has a module system too. It's not very interesting compared to Postgres because Redis modules are responsible for loading, initializing themselves. They provide all their information about themselves. They don't have an extension system. You just write a make file, and as long as it has a Redis header, you can load it as a shared object into Redis. When I initially submitted the abstract for this talk, I kind of thought there'd be more to it, but unfortunately not, or fortunately, some may say. I haven't seen any examples of Redis modules in Nixpkgs. I think maybe they're quite new. Maybe I don't know how to discover them. Certainly with Postgres as well, there was an issue of trying to find the Postgres extensions. I don't know where I would find a Redis module if it existed. I kind of think maybe like Python packages or Haskell packages, maybe there could be a Redis modules or Postgres extensions attribute set. But I don't really know much about that. So yeah, similarly, really simple derivation. This is like basically the most simple derivation you can get. Bam, you've got a Redis extension. And there's also testing Redis, like testing Postgres. So I can reuse all of my testing infrastructure for Redis as well, which is nice. Small caveat, when you have your shell next, you need a small shell hook to export your Redis modules path to your expression full of Redis modules. Just thought maybe that might be an interesting little trick to share. And now we're going to talk about Docker. It's inevitable. The people who I work with are very keen for everything to end up in a Docker container. So I have to somehow get my extensions to work with Postgres in a Docker container or with Redis in a Docker container. So there are a few tools in Nixpkgs that will help me accomplish that goal. Unfortunately, with Postgres, I can't. So Docker Tools has pull image and build image. There's also now build layered image. The place where it would want to put my extensions, it wouldn't be able to be found with the Postgres in the base image from just pulling the Postgres image, like the official library image. I could wrap it with a Postgres from Nixpkgs with the patch for libpgdir, but it's kind of awkward to do. There's like some nice shell scripts that the base library image has, and I didn't really want to commit them. So the practical side of me currently just uses a Docker file. I feel really bad about myself as a result, but I hope to improve. But I don't really know if there's a good way around doing this. However, for Redis, so I have this horrible hack where I use rsync to pull out all my extensions and then I put them in my Docker container. And I really wish I didn't have to do that. So just thought I'd share my shame with you. So Redis on the other side, and I mean, if you look up Docker tools in the Nixpkgs manual, Redis is actually the canonical example, which is quite handy. So essentially I just ripped that off, and if I want to load my module, the lib thing is a bit contrived. That's just where my expression is installing it from my makefile. Probably I want to have a better place for it. But yeah, it's simple enough. You just add a let Redis config in, and then your build image definition. And yeah, you just load it when your server starts. Easy enough. So now you know. It's still not great though. Cool thing though, all these tests I've written using temporary databases, I can now run them against the images I've built with build image, etc., or Docker if I'm feeling bad. Yeah, so essentially, I've shown you the rsync thing. I'd like to find a better way to do that. The problem I'm using GitLab CI, and it is not super compatible with Nix. So there's a few issues. One thing that really irritates me is the Docker sock thing. So it wants have privileged access to that socket so that it can upload things to my Docker registry. But if I've built my image with build image, I'm in my Nix runner, and I don't have that access, so I essentially have to copy the tarball of my image into another runner, which then loads the Docker image and then sends it to the registry, which is pretty annoying. I think, well, what I would like to maybe spend some time doing is build like a Go tool that uses a bunch of the Docker things to just upload images. So it's just a tool that takes a tarball from build image, and then you can just push it to an arbitrary registry if you have the credentials. I don't know if something like that exists. If someone knows something about that, and they can come. Oh, Zimbatem has my back. Sorry, tell me in a minute. Okay, Scorpio. So that would be really handy. Yeah, hopefully, the problem is all my images for Redis are just one layer. Hopefully, the build layered image would be helpful, but I haven't managed to integrate that yet into my pipeline. Closing thought, I was reading Hacker News yesterday, and I like to base all of my life decisions on what random people are saying on Hacker News. Someone was saying it would be good if Postgres had a package manager for extensions. Maybe what I would like to see is the ability to manage extensions. When people think, oh, I'm going to manage my Postgres extensions, they think of Nixpkgs. Acknowledgement, Justin Wu helped me set up my slides, and I said I'd give him an acknowledgement. He has a cool repo showing you how to use Nixpkgs to build stuff with Beamer. This is the point where I beg for Twitter follows, and also this slides that you're reading now are built and in the repo. Cool. Any questions or corrections?
Are there any questions? Yes, there are.
Are you aware of this pull request by Todd Police that overhauls the PostgreSQL infrastructure in Nixpkgs?
I am not. That seems like something I should have known about before I gave this talk.
Right.
Yeah, no, I am aware that a lot of the Postgres extensions are written by him. I don't know. There's some things that they do differently that I'm not sure about. So, for example, they won't use PGXS directly. They'll kind of copy the shared objects in SQL files. So, yeah. Do you have the pull request number that I can? Cool.
If you can search for PostgreSQL in GitHub for the pull request, and then it will show up.
Okay, thank you very much.
Anyone else? No. Then another round of applause for this interesting talk. Thank you.
Interesting is a good word.
And next up is Shay.